This is BBC Radio Kent. Thank you for your company. We're talking about fracking today. After councillors in North Yorkshire gave the green light to the first fracking operation in the UK for 5 years. The decision has been condemned as a travesty by people who are against fracking, but a victory for pragmatism by those who are in favour. The campaign group FRACK offers warning the plans in Yorkshire could pave the way for thousands of fracking wells across the country. We heard Friends of the Earth a little earlier on this show saying this could well bring fracking to Kent. And we know there are sites in Kent that shale gas companies would like to explore. Let's talk a little bit more about what fracking is and, crucially, a little bit about the geology of this part of the world, of Kent and the various parts of Kent. Dr. Richard Miller is an oil industry consultant and a former BP geologist. Dr. Miller, good to have you on the show. Good morning to you. Let's talk a little bit about the geology of Kent. And I appreciate that not every area of Kent would be suitable for extracting shale oil and gas, but the areas that the companies are interested in, what's beneath our feet?
Well, what you'll be hearing is talk about the Weald Basin, which is a big dip in the Earth's surface, which extends from roughly sort of Portsmouth through to, I don't know, Eastbourne, something like that, and roughly from London to the south coast. And within that dip, the shales were deposited, which contained a lot of organic matter, and over millions of years, tens of millions of years, that organic matter has been pressured and heated to the point where it may have been able to expel gas and oil, and that's the game in town, and that is what is beneath your feet.
Okay, so do we have both shale oil and shale gas beneath our feet in the southeast?
Well, we don't know. That is yet to be discovered, whether any of this magic has come to pass. But there is certainly a good probability.
And what is the difference between conventional oil and gas and shale oil and gas?
Conventional oil or gas is mobile when it's in the rocks under your feet, which means that if you drill a well, it will flow towards that well, and it will flow for some distance, for a mile or two. It will make its way to a well as soon as you start extracting it. So, in principle, you only need a few wells to tap a large field. But in unconventional, in shale-hosted oil and gas, it isn't mobile. It won't move to the well because the rock that it's in just isn't sufficiently permeable. So you have to fill the ground with a lot of holes, and you have to frack the rock so there are cracks that the oil or gas can just move to and follow that channel to the well.
So we are making holes, when we frack, we are making holes in the rock beneath our feet.
You are drilling a well, first of all vertically downwards and then horizontally sideways usually, and then you are sending pulses of high pressure fluid down that well to split the rock apart.
Is there an inherent risk in splitting the rock apart that is beneath our feet? When you put it like that, it sounds a bit, dangerous.
Sounds a bit iffy, doesn't it? Well, remember this is going to be taking place a couple of kilometres down, so it's in that sense, somewhat removed from us. But yeah, there are small, unquantified probabilities of quite bad things happening as a consequence.
Oh, now that was very caged in very sort of scientific language.
Yeah.
What do you really mean, in layman's terms, what do you mean by that last sentence?
Okay, what I mean is the probability of any single well going wrong is quite small. It's, the order of 1 in, several hundred, maybe even 1,000. But when you have to drill 2,000 wells all across the Weald Basin, or 5,000 wells, then suddenly you find that the probability of a few wells going wrong is quite high.
And what does going wrong look like in fracking?
Going wrong in this sense is what we'd call a loss of well integrity, which means that your well is starting to leak somewhere. It could be leaking oil and gas out of the well into the surrounding rocks, or it could be leaking fluid from one aquifer underground, if you like, into another. Sorry, let me explain that. This layer of rocks that's under your feet doesn't only contain oil and gas, it will also contain a lot of water. And the water at depth is likely to be very salty. This is just a fact of life in geology. Whereas the higher level rocks, things like the chalk, would contain drinking water, and we do get a lot of our water from the chalk. What you don't want is a fracking situation where a single crack leads salt water up from great depth into a high-level aquifer. Now, that to me is a risk. I have never seen it quantified, and I couldn't even cite whether a case has occurred. But I can imagine that happening, and I would not like that, because if that happens, you can never get your aquifer back.
So is this a particular threat in the southeast because we have these chalk aquifers, that because we get our water in some significant quantities from the rock beneath our feet?
Because it is such a densely populated part of the world compared to parts of outback Texas.
Which is where fracking has been conducted pretty extensively and successfully so far.
Oh, there are probably 4 or 5 states of the Union now where fracking is a major part of the economy, yeah.
So is it about whether you are for or against fracking, or is it about whether you're for or against fracking in a particular part of the country, of this country? Could you be, for instance, could you coherently and intelligently be for fracking in America, in the middle of nowhere, and against fracking in Kent?
That depends on whether you're looking at the climate change problem as well. The climate change problem will apply to any fracking that goes on. And what the climate change problem says is we can only afford to burn about 1/3 of the existing oil, gas and coal reserves that we have. So if you go out there and go exploring for more, you are simply making the problem worse.
Even though if you burn this shale gas and oil, the argument is that it is likely to produce half as much CO2 as conventional supplies.
It's still CO2. And it would be nice if the gas you produced here displaced some coal and left some coal locked in the ground. But reality is that anybody who has coal reserves is not going to lock his coal in the ground so that we can produce our gas. That's just not going to happen.
So is that the more powerful argument against fracking? Because it's interesting that it's being used as an argument for fracking, the environmental CO2 one, but you could turn around and use it against fracking as well. It's quite confusing, isn't it?
I was quite depressed when I first heard that argument used in favour of fracking. I thought, no, you guys just don't get it, do you? Or if you do get it, you are so money-focused, you're so driven by growing the economy that you don't care about the future.
So speaks a man who's a former BP geologist. How does that make any sense? You work for one of the biggest oil companies in the world.
I did work for one of the biggest oil companies.
Have you had a major epiphany since then?
Firstly, the kind of views that I express are not unique to me. You'll find perfectly ordinary geologists in all of the oil companies who have a similar, rather uncomfortable relationship with oil, gas and coal. Yeah.
But you're still happy to take their money?
You have to live in the world as it is, don't you? And that's the argument that the guys would take. It's the kind of argument I would take. I didn't really look at this problem until about the year 2000 or so, when I started to get interested in future oil supply. It's one of the jobs I did for BP. And that got me thinking about the whole problem. I became much more aware of climate change issues, and now that's what I worry about.
When you heard the news from North Yorkshire that the local planning authority had given permission, did you worry that this was the beginning of something bigger, or is this just a very small, isolated planning decision? No,
it's clearly going to be the thin end of a wedge. I noticed it was a split decision. 7-4, I think, was the vote on the council.
And is it right that a local planning authority with locally elected but not expert politicians, not experts in this field, make these decisions? Because, of course, the quadrilla application in Lancashire has been called in by the Secretary of State, one of our local MPs, Greg Clark. On what level should decisions like this be made?
I think they should be made at a local level. I don't think they should be driven from central government. And I believe the people who live locally are the ones who have got most skin in the game. They are the ones who have the greatest interest in getting the right answer. They are not just driven by money.
I've really enjoyed talking to you, Dr. Miller. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
You're welcome.
Dr. Richard Miller, oil industry consultant, former BP geologist, and a man who says, I started looking at fracking in serious depth around 2010, 2011. It's a really interesting man. I'd like to hear from you this morning.